I got lost and ended up in a village that's been evacuated. Sinister people live here. I checked my GPS. 15 more minutes. I was almost at Jason's. It had been years since I'd spent time with my brother anywhere besides a jail or rehab center. He'd had a few rough years dealing with addiction and legal issues. Luckily, he seemed to be doing a lot better now, and I was hopeful about this weekend. For his birthday tomorrow, we planned to go out to the lake, rent a kayak, and do some fishing like when we were younger. I was looking down at my phone when I glanced up and noticed a pair of eyes looking straight at me. "Shit!" I yelled. I slammed my brakes, which sent my car sideways in the gravel. I narrowly missed the deer. It was still in the middle of the road, standing still as a statue. I honked, hoping to scare it off, but it just stood there. What the hell was wrong with it? The deer was skinny and its coat was matted. Finally, it wandered off into the woods. I straightened out my car and continued on my way, just happy I got out of that with no damage. My GPS had gone silent and I noticed I lost connection. Shit. I kept driving, looking for my next turn. I kept going for quite a while. I knew I had to have passed it at this point. Feeling anxious, I turned on the radio, but all my preset stations were nothing but static. I looked for another station, but only found more static. I sighed and turned the radio off. I turned onto a gravel road, hoping it would get me back to where I was. A few minutes later, I noticed a single street light up ahead. I drove towards a small residential area. I didn't remember this area. I don't think I've ever driven through it before. The houses there were all dark. The other street lights were all dark as well, as if they'd burnt out and no one bothered to replace them. I noticed a small gas station that was lit up, hopefully open. My gas light had come on about 5 minutes before, so I decided to stop. Maybe if the store was open, I could get directions or a Wi-Fi signal. I pulled into the gas station and noticed no other customers were at the pumps. Aside from the buzzing of the fluorescent lights, it was eerily quiet in the dimly lit store. I took a quick stroll through the snack aisle, grabbing a bag of chips off the shelf. As I picked them up, the bag came open, leaving crumbs of chips all over the floor. A mouse scurried on the shelf. I tossed the chips aside in disgust. I decided against getting anything to eat, but figured I'd at least grab an energy drink. The drink I pulled out of the cooler was room temperature. Annoyed, I rolled my eyes but headed up to the counter to pay for my gas and drink. No one was at the counter. I rang the bell and waited a good 5 minutes. I heard someone moving around in the small room behind the counter. Finally, I thought. I had my card out ready to pay, but when the door opened, I stepped back. The man that emerged was emaciated, pale, and wearing dirty clothes. As creepy as this was, I was familiar with seeing people in active addiction and figured this may be the case for him, so I tried to be as polite as possible. "Hey man, I need 20 on pump 3. He stared at me for a minute, and I noticed he was drooling. "Buddy?" I said, trying to get his attention. He stared back with a blank expression. I tried to hand him my card. Still nothing. "Never mind," I said as I walked out. I tried to pay at the pump, but the pump kept instructing me to see the cashier. The other pumps weren't working either. I would just have to keep looking for a main road to take me to the nearest town. As I was pulling away from the gas station, I noticed a woman walking around the side of the building. She looked like she was in her 50s and wore jeans and a t-shirt, despite it being pretty cold out tonight. She was walking around in a circle. When I got closer, I noticed the look on her face. Her expressionless eyes mixed with an unnatural half-smile is something branded into my memory forever. I kept driving. There was some road work with detours that kept rerouting me in what felt like a giant circle. I had no luck at getting out of the area, even though I was willing to go basically anywhere to get out of there. Frustrated and low on gas, I stopped at a park. I had 1 bar of signal at this point, so I stepped out of my car and paced around the parking lot, as I tried calling my brother. He did answer, but the connection was so bad he couldn't understand anything I said. Eventually the call dropped and wouldn't reconnect. I sunk down next to my car in defeat and smoked a cigarette. There weren't any other cars here, but there was a small rest area with vending machines and a drinking fountain. I was able to find a few bucks in my car and got a bag of chips out of the machine. I heard a knocking sound. I followed it. I opened the door to the bathroom. The room was lit only by a fluorescent light that was flickering, likely on its way to burning out. A man stood in front of the sink, staring at his reflection in the mirror. He either didn't notice me or didn't care about my presence. He tipped his head back, then slammed it into the mirror. He repeated this every few seconds. Bits of glass hung from his forehead and blood dropped down his face and onto the floor. I gasped and he turned towards me. I ran to my car. It wouldn't start. The man exited the bathroom and started towards my car. I locked myself in and laid on the horn. He yelled and eventually ran away, limping as he ran. I sat there in the dark, alone and shaking. What the hell was up with people here? I'd lived in areas with drug activity and a homeless population, but this was next level. I wondered if there were any normal people here at all. Eventually, I realized I'd have to find my way out on foot. I grabbed my pocket knife, flashlight, water bottle, and phone. I walked through the wooded area behind the park. I could faintly see lights in the distance. If I could just make it through these woods, I'd be out of here. Walking along, I noticed some bright yellow signs. CWD, infected area, no trespassing. Then I remembered where I'd heard this before. My dad used to take my brother and I hunting as kids, and one day a buck pretty much served itself up on a silver platter. I remember being excited I finally shot a deer, but my dad seemed concerned. We approached and could see its body was emaciated and fur was matted. My dad shook his head. "We need to get this one tested. Looks like chronic wasting disease." "What's that?" I asked. "Basically, it's a disease that gets into the deer's brain and messes it up. Once an animal has it, they'll act really strange, starving themselves, pacing around listlessly, sometimes even hurting themselves until eventually they die." "Kind of like a zombie?" I asked. He laughed, sort of. My phone rang, snapping me out of the memory. I was relieved to see it was Jason. I could actually hear him this time. I tried to explain where I was. All I really knew was it was a village about 15 minutes north of him. "If it's Aldergrove, that place was evacuated," he told me. I asked if he knew why. Jason said he didn't know the details as it was kept very hush-hush by local government, but was related to disease. I tried to explain all the weird things I saw here when the call started breaking up again. I paced around trying to find a better signal when suddenly I felt a stinging pain in my thigh. A small arrow stuck out. I dropped my phone and my legs became weak. My vision went dark. I regained consciousness but was still groggy. My hands and feet were tied and I was being carried by a man in a military uniform. He brought me to what looked like an exam table and spoke to a man in a white coat. I couldn't hear everything because my ears were ringing, but what I did pick up was, I found him wandering in the woods, acting strange, within boundary. His voice trailed off as I fell back asleep. I woke up again to a shooting pain in my arm. I was strapped to an exam table and blood was being drawn from my left arm. Unable to move, I sleepily glanced around. I noticed other people in white coats walking around the facility, which was a large building with glass walls. I watched one of the people working there pull something out of a cooler and hand the bag off to someone else who was wearing a full hazmat suit. They opened the bag, revealing a human head which they began to use a tool to drill into. I screamed in horror. A burning fluid was injected into my neck and my vision went dark again. I woke up in a white room, connected to an IV. I jolted up expecting to be stopped by the restraints, but to my surprise, there weren't any. Jason was sitting in a chair by my hospital bed. "Hey, I'm glad you're awake," he exclaimed. "What happened?" I asked. Just then the doctor stepped in. He shook my hand. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Pretty rough," I answered. He nodded. "You had a pretty bad hit in the head out there, but you'll be fine in a few days. Just try to keep some ice on it. The nurse will be in with your discharge information soon." When he left the room, I asked Jason what happened. He told me he got a call from the police saying I was found out in the woods, passed out from a head wound. Jason said he assumed I ran into a branch and that's why our call cut out. I decided not to tell him what I saw and started to wonder if maybe it was all some kind of concussion-induced hallucination. I was able to let it go for the rest of the night, but as I was getting dressed the next morning, I noticed something. A scab and small bruise on my left arm that looked like they were from an IV. Except when I woke up in the hospital, the IV was in my right arm, not my left. I remembered waking up in fear at the strange facility and having blood drawn from my left arm. It was all real. I don't know how to tell Jason or anyone else without sounding crazy. I now spend a lot of my free time researching CWD, but so far everything says it hasn't been documented making the jump to humans. There is also no cure, and it has a 100% fatality rate. I can see why this research is being kept in the shadows, as I can't imagine the kind of unrest that would happen if the public knew. I really envy everyone who's blissfully unaware of the huge danger lurking right in the woods.